Hello, this is Hudson Gilmer with Genscape. I would like to welcome everyone to the webinar. We'll be talking about the multi-client study that we launched just in the last couple of weeks, Framing the New Market Reality. I'm joined by Jed Bailey of Energy Narrative. And before we get started, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping items. So we've gotten a couple questions about a dial-in number. There actually is not a dial-in number, so to receive the audio, you need to use the audio on your computer. Also, in terms of questions, we will have everyone in listen-only mode during the webinar and save questions until the end. But you should see a box at the bottom of your screen where you can ask us questions, and we'll take as many as time allows at the end of the session. And finally, we will be sending slides or PDFs of the slides to all the participants. So those will go out either today or tomorrow. So with that, I'd like to introduce my co-study director, Jed Bailey, and have him walk through the agenda and the purpose of the study.
Excellent. Thank you, Hudson. As Hudson mentioned, my name is Jed Bailey. I'm the managing director of Energy Narrative, a consulting firm focused on the energy sector worldwide. And we're working with Genscape on this study focused on Mexico's gas and power sector through 2035 using our scenario-based analysis and Genscape's data and modeling capabilities. So the object for today's call is to provide some more detail about the study, why we're doing the study, why we're doing it now, our approach to developing the materials for the study, including the scenario development approach that Energy Narrative uses and the modeling platform from Genscape that we'll be using. We'll give some more details on the timeline, the deliverables, the value proposition, and then save plenty of time at the end for your questions to make sure that we're answering any questions you may have on the study, its content, deliverables, and uses. So if we can go to the next slide. As many of you know, Mexico is at a unique moment in its history. Having launched an energy reform process just a few short years ago, it's made dramatic progress in installing a radically different electricity market, a new structure for their natural gas sector, opening up the upstream for private sector investment for the first time in over eight decades. And this churn of change and rapid innovation is creating a large number of new opportunities, but also what we term a gold rush of new companies entering. And indeed, almost a gold rush mentality of move quickly, get established, focus on the details later. What we want to do with this study is to provide a firm grounding on what this new market structure looks like, how the fundamentals could evolve with the future, including regulations, supply, demand, and the rest, and what that might mean for the various companies participating in Mexico's energy sector. Because the new market is evolving so quickly and because it is so complex, a wide range of expertise is needed, more so now than ever. Understanding of Mexico, how to do business in Mexico, and in particular within Mexico's energy sector is of critical importance. But now layered on top of that, you also need a strong view on how to function in a competitive market, particularly a highly competitive electricity market as they are now developing in Mexico. And so one reason that was very attractive to us to work with Genscape is given their background in similar markets in the United States and their expertise in modeling and analyzing these types of structures. Finally, it's because things are changing so quickly, it's difficult to shed your biases and shed the vivid information of what's happening today in order to think clearly about where things could go tomorrow, in particular where there could be inflections or nonlinear changes from the path that you see forward today. And it's in this type of rapidly changing and highly uncertain environment that we believe scenario analysis is of critical importance. The focus on the qualitative story, focusing on the trends and the inputs and the drivers that can affect change before then moving to the modeling and using the modeling platform and data capabilities in order to put numbers to those qualitative storylines. So it's a great time to be doing scenario analysis. And finally, it also struck us as we were thinking through these rapid changes that it's a far more level playing field today in Mexico than you may have seen in the last 5, 10, or 15 years. Because things are changing so fast, even incumbent players will have to adapt. This opens up space for innovative business and business opportunities and new business value propositions, but also creates very hard to foresee risks. And one way that this study will help address that is by bringing in a large number of different perspectives, not only from the experts across the energy narrative and Genscape teams, but also from the participating companies themselves, which will be representing a wide variety of industries and sectors, from power generation, renewable energy, through upstream and downstream natural gas, service providers, and financing organizations. So with that broad overview, I'd like to now turn to a little more detail on where we see Mexico today, why we see many of these changes are amenable to scenario analysis, and how this study will address them. So looking at our timeline here of how Mexico has changed over just the last few years, as we can see, the draft rules for the wholesale energy market were only announced just about 18 months ago, about 16 months ago. They really weren't fully put in place until less than 6 or 8 months ago. And the first energy market operations just happened in late January of this year. Even as this new structure is being put in place, other critical factors like CFE's subsidiaries and the breakup of CFE into its component parts is only just now being implemented. We've had our first long-term auction for capacity and energy and clean energy certificates was adjudicated back in March. Those contracts from that auction were only just signed a few weeks ago, and the second auction is now in process with expectations for mid-September. So it's important to note that we're at a stage now where the big components of this new market are in place. The laws and the regulations and the market rules are at least in a first draft, have been implemented, and we're starting to get information on how this is actually going to work in practice. Certainly, things will continue to evolve, but we have enough information and enough history now and as we go through this study to provide a solid basis to provide our views on where these scenarios could possibly go in the future without it being a wild speculation with no historical information behind it. Having said that, there's certainly still a lot of things left that are up in the air, that are unknown, that remain to be defined. Most importantly is how CFE will evolve, its role in the market, how its various subsidiaries will interact, whether it will in the future divest assets, take on new roles or new capabilities. As the largest player in the market today and certainly for the foreseeable future, the actions that CFE takes will have a critical importance. Linked to that, the legacy IPPs and their contracts, how those are treated, how those companies view the opportunities in the competitive market, and whether they will choose to shift to that new structure or remain under their legacy contract. Whether the government remains committed to its renewable energy goals. These targets are aggressive but doable, but of course there's an election coming up in 2018 and the new government may have new priorities. Given that, how will the clean energy certificate market evolve? What prices would we expect going forward? Will the wholesale clearinghouse be implemented? It's one of the critical points required to allow industrial customers to join the market and be able to bid actively for power contracts. Without that, the power market will remain a shadow of what was expected, but it's not clear exactly when this wholesale clearinghouse will be implemented. Financial transmission rights and others will, of course, have an important impact as well. As we go down the list, it's a large number of things that we can look at with these scenarios, and one of the joys of the scenario process is we can focus on those factors that we believe are most important for the country and the sector today and for the people involved in the study itself. So to shift away from Mexico and more toward scenario development in general, a reason why we use scenarios, and here I want to be very clear that the scenario process we use is very different from straight line forecasting or what I would call more sensitivity analysis. It's based on the process that was popularized by Shell many decades ago. where you look at component parts that can be put together into a cohesive, internally consistent storyline. And the approach is much more focused on teasing out uncertainty and risk, teasing out where different inputs can have linkages and how they may affect trends in the future before you get to the solid numerical forecast. And the reason why we do this is we're showing here in the graphic, what we're showing here are the Mexican government CENER's official forecast for electricity peak demand growth starting back about 12 years ago, actually about 14 years ago, going from about a 10-year to a 20-year forecast starting back in 2002. And as you can see, for each year that the government produced these forecasts, the expectation was demand growth would remain quite strong on the order of 4 to 5%. And yet, for much of the past decade, electricity demand growth has actually been on the order of 1%. So the point here is that once you have a bias, it's very hard to shake it. It's very easy to stick with what you've seen in the history and very difficult to adjust to a new reality and break out of that mold of thinking. And it also illustrates that most projections, and particularly those from governments, tend to have a bias toward optimism. This can have a number of effects. I think the most important of which is back when the government was the one determining how much new capacity would be built, that optimism bias resulted in a consistent overbuild of the sector because they would continually auction out new IPP projects based on the expectations of demand growth in the future, which never quite came true. And so you had a persistently overbuilt sector, which if you were just doing a standard forecasting model, the model would expect you to revert that overbuild back to the mean and drop that down to, say, a 15-20% capacity margin, which is fairly standard for a market. If you had done that back in 2003, you would have been completely underestimating the amount of new capacity that would have been built for the next 10 years. So it highlights, why we value using scenarios to think through how things can change and how decisions and trends interact to drive future forces before we get into the modeling process itself. So to give a little detail on exactly how we do scenarios, scenarios are built up from 4 key elements. We start with constants. These are the factors that will not change throughout the period of the scenario, and they tend to set boundaries on how widely the scenarios can range. A good example of this would be population growth. The vast majority of the people that will be alive 30 years from now have already been born, and those that have not, we can have a very solid expectation of their numbers based on birth rates and the rest, which change very, very slowly over time. So population growth and total population is a fairly constant factor that can help bound the scenarios. The next element are actors. These are the individuals or the entities that can have a direct impact on the sectors that are being examined in the scenarios. For example, CENER, government policy, private sector investors, how we see the banks viewing the profitability and the bankability of new projects. These actors that have their own biases, their own interests, their own constraints will all interact in how they can affect how different scenarios may evolve. Similar to actors, we have drivers, which are the disembodied forces that can also change the future. Things like demand growth, things like GDP growth, other factors, global oil prices, for example, that can change one scenario to another. And then the variables, which are the specific things that the actors and drivers are affecting that we will then be feeding into the model when we start to do the more quantitative analysis once we have the broad scenario storylines developed. So on the next slide, we show how we take these 4 types of scenario elements. In our initial workshop and interactions with the participants of the study, we'll gather your views and thoughts on what are the most important components that we should be focused on. The team will then go back, think through how all these different factors and components could evolve and what are some plausible, internally consistent storylines that incorporate different evolutions or different inflections of these various components. And then we'll create 3 to 4 specific scenario storylines focused on those components that the group feels are the most important to explore. Those storylines, as we note, are not straight line forecasts. As we see here, we have one that starts off relatively strong but then flattens out, two others that start off relatively slow but then they diverge in the future. And this ability for the different storylines to cross and overlap is a critical part of scenario development. Once we have those broad qualitative storylines, we then move toward the specific modeling parameters and think about, what does this story specifically mean for the type of new capacity that will be built and when, the extent of new pipeline development or the availability of Mexico's natural gas production. What does it mean for electricity demand growth, for fuel prices, and the rest? And that's when we get into the more quantitative analysis of how these scenarios could play out in the future. So at this point, given we've gotten to the modeling segment, I'd like to turn the call back over to Hudson, who can tell us more detail about how Genscape's capabilities will play into developing that modeled forecast.
Thanks, Jed. So Jed covered kind of the process, the scenario definition. What I'm going to go into is the platform that we'll use during this study and also the data that will feed into that platform, the modeling platform. So Genscape has a platform that we're quite proud of called the EPSI model. And I'll give you a quick tour of it, but just before doing that, the intent here is not to make this a sales pitch for EPSI. It's really to kind of illustrate how this can fuel and enrich the study process. So EPSI is different from most models you may be familiar with in that it's a web-hosted online platform with all the data fully integrated. So it's a platform that's been serving clients for over 8 years. We've got it rolled out for a number of geographies, including Europe and Japan and most recently Mexico. And one of the real advantages of it is its speed and flexibility. It allows scenarios to be defined and in a very transparent way. You can go through all the detailed assumptions, vary them, and actually run scenarios within a matter of seconds or minutes. And then the other kind of key differentiator is that Genscape takes responsibility for the updating and the quality control of the data, which is huge. Pretty much every client we've talked to who has exposure to the Mexico market, their first complaint, their first issue is transparency and access to the data. We take responsibility for that. And then the second issue that they often cite is the difficulty of integrating it into whatever modeling platform they might have. And again, this is covered within the EPSI platform. So when we look at traditionally the way these multi-client studies have been run, usually it's a sequential process with limited iterations of modeling. The scenarios are defined, the team then goes away, runs the models. Often the platforms that are running those models take hours or significant amount of time to turn around results. And it's almost a black box where then you get the results at the end. What we're excited about in working together with Jed and the Energy Narrative team is we'll be able to, in these workshops, use a much more dynamic approach to saying, okay, let's vary assumptions, maybe market drivers like gas prices, like demand, like government assumptions around generation builds, how many nuclear plants, if any, will be built. And in real time, we can see what the impact of that is on the market results and on the different scenarios. And then the other advantage of this platform is its transparency, just the fact that as a participant, you will have full access, not just to the written reports, but also to the full data sets for each scenario, the assumptions, the inputs that go into it, as well as the results. So spending a little bit of time, I just want to cover the data sources because obviously this is a kind of garbage in, garbage out situation. The Mexico market, we talked about transparency earlier. Genscape has been involved for over a year now, and we're serving the majority of market participants, including incumbents, including competitive IPPs, integrated energy companies, and project developers. And through that experience, we've gained access to what we believe is the most complete and accurate data set, really spanning all aspects of the data required to run accurate scenarios. So I won't go into detail on all of this, but we have historical data on generation down to the unit and hourly level. We have supply stack information, understanding unit attributes and sourced and validated by multiple references. We have historical demand, we have tie flows, we have unit dispatch data. Through Scenair, we're capturing the Proto-Sen data sets, and as Jed mentioned earlier, these need to be taken with somewhat a grain of salt because there's some inherent optimism in things like perhaps renewable development and some of the infrastructure builds. But it's an important reference point. Also from Senase, they are currently publishing data that is collected and fed into the platform around actual demand, actual prices, actual power flows, and between now and the end of the year, we expect the type of data that's going to be published by Senase will increase considerably, and we'll be collecting and ingesting all that into the platform. Again, this is all this data is available for the study and ensures that when we're running scenarios, we have a rigorous grounding in the fundamentals. So just one slide. Obviously, there's a symbiotic relationship between gas and power, and I think that's as true in Mexico as it is in many other markets. Genscape is fortunate that we have Rick Margolin on our study team who heads Genscape's natural gas analyst group. And also is responsible for developing the service that monitors gas exports from the U.S. into Mexico. And in the process of doing that, also monitors gas production within Mexico and produces forecasts of that, as well as forecasts of demand both in the industrial and in the power sector. So this slide just illustrates the accuracy of our U.S. exports to Mexico monitoring service. That platform has had about 3% absolute error over the last year, and is using a proprietary technology that's measuring the compressor stations that are pushing gas through those pipelines. And is also monitoring projects on the new pipeline builds, such as Los Ramones to Roadrunner and half a dozen other projects that will significantly increase gas capacity into Mexico. So one of the outputs of this study will be great visibility and granularity on gas burn and gas demand in Mexico over the study period. And the last thing that I wanted to do is just give you a quick demo, just so you can get a better feel for the EPSI platform and how we'll be running these scenarios during the study. So we'll wait just a second for this to buffer. So what you can see, this is a live access to the EPSI platform. Again, I'm not planning on a detailed demo, but really just to illustrate the data integration of the platform, the flexibility to be able to run scenarios and sensitivities within those scenarios, and also the transparency to be able to pull data out of it. So if you can see here, we have system data where we can go in and we can see all the plants, the entire supply stack for Mexico. We can select plants. We can go down and see the detailed information around capacity, around fuel type, around owner, around startup costs, operation costs, and so forth. We also have what we call kind of a market data store concept. And if I go in there, you can see there's a rich set of data everything from unit bidding data and cost data to hydro data to solar capacity, wind capacity, startup costs. And if I just illustrate demand, and obviously we're looking at Mexico, what we've done is preloaded in the platform 4 years of historical hourly Mexico demand data, as well as the data that SENER has published through the PRODECEN. So this gives us two options, and of course we can input and upload third options. But this allows you to see, again, if I just select the historical data, I can go in there, I can see the daily shape, the hourly shape, and then, you know, as we get into the study period and the definition of these scenarios, we can get the input from participants and decide exactly how we want to feed these models. And then just to illustrate, here we have a scenario, a recent scenario that we've run based on the PRODECEN assumptions, and I'll just show that briefly. So this allows you to see, and I'll select the Northeast region, but it allows you to see rich data sets and visuals on a lot of the essential information that study participants are going to want. It allows you to see, according to PRODECEN, how the supply stack by technology evolves. You know, you can see here the significant increase in wind that's assumed, an increase in combined cycle plants. We can look at flows. So for this specific region, we can see how the flows for this specific region. We can see that the Norest is a net exporter of power, but that declines over time. We can look at fuel consumption. So back to the point on natural gas, we can see there's some assumptions around coal retirements over the study period. We can see what the natural gas burn is, and of course market prices. And here you see a lot of variability initially, and then again, according to PRODECEN, we're assuming that there's a lot of transmission that's being built that will reduce the basis, the congestion between different regions in Mexico, which results in a flattening out of the curve in the out years. But of course, what we're doing with this study is coming up with independent, more reality-based assumptions, not strictly relying on the PRODECEN inputs. So, but once that process is completed, all that data will be accessible through this platform and to study participants. So let me turn it back to Jed just to talk a little bit more about the time frame and the deliverables and so forth.
Excellent. Thank you, Hudson. So to bring it all together, I just wanted to highlight a few of the ways that we see participants using the study and applying the insights, the analysis to specific needs within their companies. Clearly, we feel this study will help you understand Mexico's risks and opportunities both today and tomorrow in greater detail and vividness. Through that, we'll help identify important trends and inflection points to keep an eye on as the sector continues to evolve and the reforms move forward. We also think the study will help you test internal biases and views, provide an external reference point to either views held by the company or internal forecasts that you've developed yourselves, and then use those insights and views to either further refine or build out your own modeling data and assumptions. Certainly from the wide range of participants, we can get different perspectives on how different companies and sectors will be developing under the scenarios, and help those that are looking to sell their products or capabilities to further focus their business development efforts, whether it's selling power to industrials or selling legal services to power developers and beyond. And finally, using the quantitative analysis that Hudson just described in detail will provide a good platform for performing market due diligence and providing specific forecasts for your own new investments and internal approvals. So with that, let me talk some details on how we see the study moving forward. We're looking to have the kickoff workshop in late September. In that workshop, we'll have a number of energy narrative experts, as well as folks from the Genscape team, providing an overview of Mexico's gas and power sector so that all participants have a common grounding in where the sector is today, what the key issues are. We'll also have a moderated discussion of those issues in order to get to the scenario building blocks for the inputs to the scenarios that we'll be developing. That will be a full-day workshop, very interactive between the study team and the participants and among the participants themselves, as we anticipate having representatives from very different parts of Mexico's energy sector. We'll have a mid-project conference call in November to talk through the draft scenarios, just to present the storylines that we've come up with, get your thoughts and feedback on that before we go deeply into the modeling approach and details. And then a final workshop in late January where we will present the final scenarios and the draft modeling output. And as Hudson mentioned, one of the key aspects of using the EPSI platform is we'll be able to, in real time during that workshop, work through different sensitivities or different variations based on what the participants would like to explore in greater depth or test to see if changes have a major or minor impact on the conclusions. After that final workshop, the team will go back to write up the report, provide any final edits and revisions that come out of the workshop. And we expect to have that final report ready by late February or into March with hard copies and, of course, electronic data files that Hudson mentioned. So all of that comes down to the commercial terms. Participation fee is $25,000 for each company. That includes 2 seats at each of the interactive workshops, as well as the hard copies and the data sets. And we mentioned space is limited, largely because at those workshops, we want to ensure that there's a very fluid discussion and a high degree of interaction. And so there's only a limited number of people we can have at the workshops and still have that more intimate discussion and back and forth. So we will limit the number of people that we allow at the workshops, and as part of that, a maximum of 2 seats per participating company. In addition to the project and the main report itself, as I just described, there are other enhancements that are available for those that are interested. We can provide private workshops following the study in order to drill down on the implications of the scenarios and the conclusions for your operations and assets in particular. The EPSI modeling platform is available for your own private use. In addition, Energy Narrative provides a weekly news summary focused on Mexico's energy sector called the Weekly Brief Mexico that's available. And certainly customized consulting support for either strategy or operational needs is available as well. So with that, I'd like to shift now toward the Q&A portion. I believe we have plenty of time available, so we look forward to your questions to make sure that we address any concerns or thoughts that you may have. So at this point, let me pause briefly while we review the questions that have come in over the internet while we were speaking, and we will return momentarily.
Okay, so the first question is, can you tell us more about the team working on the study?
Sure. I guess I can take a first stab at the Energy Narrative team and pass it back to you.
Sure.
Okay, sure. So from the Energy Narrative team, I will be leading the effort. I have just under 20 years experience in Mexico, having first analyzed the sector in the late 1990s. And indeed, this will be the third scenario-based long-term multi-client study focused entirely on Mexico that I'll have participated in. The first being in the late 1990s. I led another one back in 2006, and now this one today. So I will be leading the effort from the Energy Narrative side, supported by our junior team based in Paris, the U.S., and Mexico City. In addition, we'll lean on Energy Narrative's expert network, including senior folks in Mexico City with a strong background in product development, finance, and regulation analysis. These include folks like Anna Raptis, who has a deep experience in developing power and LNG projects in Mexico and elsewhere. Folks like Maxi Zaguirre, former country manager for power developers and natural gas operators in Mexico City, also a former chairman of the Texas PUC, will also be supporting this. In addition, we'll tap into Jamie Morton, who is a former managing director with various investment banks that have been active in the energy and natural resources sector in Mexico and Latin America. And then finally, Dwight Dyer, former senior analyst within Mexico's intelligence community and a security and risk specialist who supports companies that are concerned about security issues within Mexico. So each of those are members of the broader Energy Narrative expert network and will be participating in the workshops as well as helping to support our work in building the scenarios.
Okay, and just to add to that, on the Genscape side, I'll be study director, counterpart to Jed, and then supported by Sam Johnson, who's our EPSI Mexico analyst. And I didn't mention this earlier, but we are monitoring the market on a daily basis and have probably as granular and kind of detailed an understanding of the spot market as pretty much anyone else. So we're watching, and Sam specifically is watching the day-ahead price. Once the real-time price starts, he'll be watching that as well, watching kind of how units behave and gas constraints and really making sure that the modeling assumptions are kind of grounded in the reality we're seeing in the market. We'll also have Chris Seipel participating on the team. Chris heads Genscape's Power Group, has 15 years experience in the sector with GE as well as with Sierra. And also Toine Vollebrecht and Pierre Buisson will be supporting us. So they are instrumental in building and maintaining the EPSI platform. So we've got another question that came in. Do you have the Mexico national transmission grid mapped? And could it be possible to model transmission capacity in a certain area? Excellent question. The answer is yes. So we have the full network model incorporated into EPSI we have what we call the PSSE file, which includes every line, every transformer, and understand what kind of congestion implications that carries based on different growth scenarios or demand scenarios. So it's very easy within the EPSI model to then look at, for instance, Baja South, where there's insufficient transmission capacity and elevated prices, or currently the Yucatan, and see how those congestion elevated prices change if we make different assumptions around builds or expansion of either generation or transmission. We've got another question. So can we share what kind of other companies we expect to participate in the study?
Sure. We talk broadly about the categories of companies that I would expect to be joining, certainly. So certainly product developers, power generators developers, and renewable energy developers that are actively looking at projects and moving things forward in Mexico. We would expect to be involved. Also, pipeline operators and natural gas supply, especially companies looking to export natural gas from the U.S. into Mexico, we would expect to participate. In addition, IPP operators who are thinking through whether or not to shift off of their current legacy contracts would be another prime participant. We would see on the finance side, investment banks that are looking to finance projects or have deals in front of them today would be likely participants, as well as potentially other service providers along the lines of the large accounting firms, legal firms that are active in the energy sector, and the rest. Some upstream players have voiced a strong interest as well, folks who are either currently exploring in Mexico and are curious what to do with gas should they find it, or those folks that are looking at potential production just on the other side, on the U.S. side, and looking at export potential into Mexico. Other companies like EPC companies and engineering firms looking to boost their business development capabilities in either power or natural gas as well. That's just a quick overview of the types of folks we expect to see. I guess one that I didn't mention also, large industrials. Certainly as there are more opportunities to be active in the competitive market and to have to evaluate offers from various potential suppliers, we expect to see large industrial customers to be major participants as well.
Yeah, I've got one final question, and that is, can you be more specific on how you'll model Mexico's natural gas production?
Yes. Okay, sure. It's a tricky question because certainly now that Mexico has opened up and there's a much larger cadre of companies focusing on exploring for primarily oil, but also gas within Mexico, it's less straightforward to predict how much gas Mexico may have, certainly than back in the day when it was just a Pemex story. The approach that we are taking here is to start with historical data, certainly, and current trends at the field level. So thinking through and projecting through decline rates on current production, as well as known investment in known fields and the expected impact that will have on future production levels. We'll then look at the prospective fields that have come through during the auction process of the past year, as well as those included in proposed future auctions from the data from CENAIR. Again, applying a grain of salt in our scenario process to thinking through exactly how many of those may be developed and when. Using that then to project out future curves at the field and regional level, and where those would then interface with the national pipeline grid as that continues to expand within Mexico. So our approach would be to use Mexico production as the basis, then use our demand forecasts based on our scenario assumptions and the pipeline build-out, and from that, think through on what that means for imports, exports from the United States to balance out the system.
And just to add to that, Genscape on the gas side has a lot of expertise and experience there. So this is one area where we expect that these scenarios may differ significantly from what the government's published expectations are around production. There appears to be a fair bit of optimism there, and we expect that we can bring folks down to earth a little bit. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank everyone for participating. On the last slide here, you see contact details. All of you should have received the prospectus. If you haven't, feel free to contact us. As I said earlier, we'll be sending out the slides to everyone who participated here. And if you have any further questions, you can contact myself or my colleague, Kristen Gates. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.